So imagine you've got a headache and you assume that the headache must be due to dehydration. So you do what the internet tells you and you drink more water, more water, more water. And yes, the water is good for you and it feels like you're doing the right thing, but the headache doesn't go away because the real issue isn't dehydration. In this case, it's eye strain. So it doesn't matter how much water you drink, nothing changes. Not because water is wrong, but because you're trying to solve the wrong problem. And that is what's happening for a lot of people at work. They think they have a quote unquote communication problem. So they reach for communication tips or they think about how to present your point effectively or create executive presence or they think about their professional brand. But those tips are like drinking more water. They are helpful in the right context, but they're completely useless if the real issue is something else. And that's the core idea in today's episode. If your communication is only an issue, if it only breaks down when self doubt kicks in, it's not a communication issue. It's a confidence issue. And that's what I'm going to be exploring for you in today's episode. People so often misdiagnose confidence challenges as communication problems. That's the symptom that they're seeing, but it's not the root cause. So, we're going to be looking at why communication tips and executive presence type hacks don't actually work in these situations. And I'm going to share with you what's actually happening underneath. So, the internal confidence drop that happens before you go to speak. And I want to encourage you to start working at that moment instead of trying to layer any kind of communication technique on the top of it. We're also going to look at a real listener situation. So again, like last week's episode, I did a agony aunt series where I got people to write in who are podcast listeners, tell me about what their challenges are. And this one we called Struggling to be Taken Seriously. This is a person who'd stepped into a new role, but they found that ideas weren't always landing with the authority that she knew they should. So I'm going to be unpacking why it usually has less to do with how you communicate and much more to do with what happens inside you before you communicate at all. So, this particular person who wrote in, who said they were struggling to be taken seriously, said, "What I seem to say doesn't seem to land with authority." Even though she said, "I've got strong thinking and clear ideas, but when I go to put them across, they just don't seem to land with the authority that she thinks they should." So that raised a key question for me. Is this actually a communication issue? Or is it something else entirely? And in this case, I don't think it was a communication issue. I think that it was a confidence issue. So, very often people assume the solution lies in improving communication, speaking more clearly, or sounding more authoritative, or refining their tone, or using fancier words, or thinking about executive presence. But there's a really simple reality check that you can do to find out whether it is a communication issue or whether it's actually a confidence issue. And it's this: if you can communicate clearly when you feel calm or with certain people, let's say people who you feel comfortable with, then you already know how to communicate, which means this is not a missing skill. The issue is what changes before communication happens. So this very often will happen with clients who come to speak to me. They'll think, oh, it's a communication issue. I just need to learn how to say things more clearly or strike the right tone or be a bit more politically savvy. And I'll always ask them, how do you think you communicate with people who you feel really confident with? And if they say, oh, I actually don't struggle in those scenarios at all, that tells us there isn't really a communication issue. That is why communication tips often don't help when the actual challenge that you're facing is panic, self doubt, overthinking, like getting in your head the moment before you communicate. Of course, any communication tool or technique is going to fall short in that moment because you cannot technique your way out of a load of internal doubt and worry. The kind of clarity that you might experience in a normal conversation when you're just free and you're flowing may disappear when your nervous system is very activated. And those surface level fixes and tips don't actually address the root cause. So I want to be clear that communication tools in the right moment, in the right setting, do have value, but they are most useful when someone is already steady, when someone is already, in my opinion, quite an adept communicator and they're looking to refine their impact. If you experience hesitation, anxiety, doubt, if you end up in your head instead of present in the room, and you've noticed a loss of clarity because of that in the moment, communication tips is not where you should focus. Because your communication is not actually the issue. What's actually happening, what's actually going on underneath the surface is a pattern that may be happening in every setting where you are struggling to communicate. Let's say you're in a meeting situation and then for whatever reason, doubt. So either you hear noise in your head, which sounds like doubt or worry or insecurity, and or you experience feelings like panic, anxiety, then your communication is impacted by the doubt that's happening in your head and or the feelings that you're experiencing in your body in that moment. Now notice, you communicate fine when you're very comfortable or in a setting where you can just be yourself. Because that pattern is not happening. When you're just having a conversation with someone who you're comfortable with, that doubt is not creeping in. You're not in your head second guessing things you're saying. You're not experiencing that panic or that worry. You're just speaking freely. You're not in your head. So your communication is fine. And the things that I see that tend to get in people's heads in those moments and in their bodies are fear of being challenged. Sometimes people are anticipating judgment. People may have experienced past situations where it was really difficult, or they've been challenged or got something wrong, or they may have just seen it happen with other people. Or there may even, and probably are, be broader sort of structural societal dynamics like authority gaps. Now, I just want to put a word on this here because it is important that when we're thinking about communication and how communication lands and who gets listened to and for how long and how much weight and impact people's communication is given, it is important that we notice that there are authority gaps at work. And I'm specifically thinking about gender authority gaps, but they also exist in other contexts. So the authority gap shows that women's ideas are often less likely to be heard or credited in professional environments. To an even greater degree for women who are black or brown in a white context. So it's important to just notice this here, that some people do get listened to and their ideas do get picked up to a greater degree than others. And I think recognizing that just helps to remove some of the unnecessary self-blame and self-doubt that it can generate when someone doesn't appear to be taken as seriously as they think they could or should be, or even as seriously as someone else might be. It's good to understand that there can be structural stuff, gender bias, racism, etc. going on, so you don't start blaming yourself for it and assuming you're the problem. But even in that context, even in an authority gap context, there is still a lever that we can work with around our confidence, which will help us communicate as clearly as we can, as freely as we can in any setting that we go into. And the real work, if you're struggling with communication in certain settings and not in others, is to think about and focus on that moment before you go to speak. You do not build confident communication by trying to sound more confident. A lot of people will focus on this. How do I sound more confident? How do I sound more erudite? So that either people take me seriously or my arguments have weight, or I just can get my words out clearly and fluently. And just be aware when you're listening to this podcast. Because someone said to me before, oh, you speak so clearly and fluently on your podcast. I want to be able to speak like that. And I was like, do you know that I edit this podcast? This is not you listening to me in its raw format. It's pretty close, but even this has editing. Anyway, I digress. You do not get more confident in your communication by trying to sound more confident. You build it by noticing and working with that moment before your confidence drops. Because that's the moment where communication suffers and gets shaky. So I want you to think about the last time where you were struggling to communicate in a certain setting, or where it felt hard, or it just felt really stilted or unnatural or just really difficult. Zone into that very moment right before it got hard and start paying attention to what thought appeared just before you lost your clarity. What were you anticipating was going to happen as a result of you speaking? Or notice what shifted in your body or your energy or your physical being. Did you experience a dry throat or a prickling in your face? Did you suddenly go red or get hot or get cold? Because that moment is the precursor. And that is the moment where we want to focus. Once you can see and start to work with that moment, you can begin to change it. So let's say in a particular setting, you suddenly feel a knot in your stomach, you feel a tightening in your throat. Throwing a communication tip on top of that is not going to help, because it would say something like, take a nice deep breath and then speak slowly, which is rubbish advice for two reasons. One is that you're just trying to manage a symptom which has already occurred. And two, because for a lot of my clients, and maybe for you, doing a nice deep breath is just like, it's like someone's got a wound which is pouring with blood and they're like, oh, here's a little plaster. Well, that's not going to do anything, is it? And if, let's say I was helping you with this particular problem and you were working with me one-on-one, which you can come and do, by the way. There's a link in the show notes, book it, come and have a chat. But let's say I was working with you one-on-one in this meeting, in this moment, you're going to be presenting in front of the board, and suddenly when it's your turn to speak, you get a knot in your stomach, you get a tightness in your throat, and suddenly you lose the plot. You start speaking fast, jumping all over the place. Your communication, which is normally fine, becomes just all a bit of a blur and a bit of a mess. If you come and work with me in that moment, I don't want to give you a tool which is going to help you to deal with the symptom which has already presented itself. I want to help you get to a place where that knot in your stomach and that feeling in your throat are no longer there. Because once they're not there, guess what? The prep that you've done is sufficient. You know what you're talking about because you've been invited, and you can communicate fine. Because there wasn't a communication issue to begin with. There was an issue that was a knot in the stomach. There was an issue that was a tightening in the throat. And those things, when they were present, impacted how clearly you were able to communicate. And those things, the knot in the stomach and the tightness in the throat, and even any stories which are going through your mind, like, they're all going to judge me, everyone's smarter than me, what am I doing here? We can work to change those stories. And we can work to change those feelings that arise in that moment, which really are the thing which make it super hard for you. The reason why those feelings have been installed are going to be a little bit different for everybody. But usually it's a form of emotional memory. So the brain runs on pattern and prediction. And let's say you've been in a situation in the past where you totally lost your place, or you stumbled over your words, or it was super embarrassing, something happened. The next time you're in a situation that feels like that, your body and your brain remembers this, and responds in a way which is designed to be preventative, either by getting you to think very carefully before you say anything or just don't speak at all. That knot in the stomach and the tightening in the throat have a perfectly logical, reasonable, and rational reason for being. You may not know what it is yet, but you can find that out. And when you do, you can start to work with it. And sometimes you don't even need to know why. You can just work to reprogram, so to speak, the feelings that arise in that moment. It is so fun when I do work with a client. Let's say they struggle to communicate when they're leading a training or, speaking to an external client. And we do the work to recondition that response, the knot in the stomach, the tightness in the throat, which makes communication difficult. And once we've done that work, they come and they say, I didn't feel those feelings in that moment. What on earth did we do? What happened? And the truth is, we did some memory reconsolidation. We changed the brain's prediction for how it should feel in that given moment. And instead of there being a knot and a tightness, we installed peace and calm. Then you experience those instead. And when you experience a bit of peace and a bit of calm, even though if there's a little bit of nerves, you can communicate fine. So the real work is not communication skills, probably. It is figuring out what is happening in that moment right before you go to speak and how that is impacting your communication, and then working at that point and at that level to change that so that you can feel calmer, more collected, and more confident. And when you feel like that, what do you know? You can communicate. So the goal is not for you to work out how to sound better or more polished or more serious or more, air quotes, executive. The goal is to feel internally steady enough that your natural communication can come through with as much clarity and authority as it normally does in other settings. So if you're thinking that you're struggling with your communication, but it's only happening in certain settings, I hope this gives you something alternative to explore, because it may not be a communication issue at all. It may be the issue of what is happening in your mind and in your body the moment before you go to communicate. And if it is, that's the work that needs to be done. Forget adding a million fixes and tips and deep breaths on top. Go for the root. And if you would like to come and do this work with me, there is a link in the show notes. You can book a call and come and talk to me about one-on-one private coaching or joining the Confident at Work membership. And I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident.